All right, we want to be able to find the absolute value of expressions. So we already defined absolute value to be the distance that a number is away from zero. So if I want to find the absolute value of 2, we check it out on the number line. Here's 2. And we want to see how far it is away from 0. So we just count 1, 2 steps. So the absolute value of 2 is 2. The thing is, how far away from 0 is negative 2? Well, the absolute value of negative 2, since negative 2 is right here, we'll count how far it is away from 0. 1 step, 2 steps. So its absolute value is also 2. If we looked at another pair of numbers like that, maybe absolute value of 4. Well, the absolute value of 4 is from 4 over to 0, that's 4 steps away, which happens to be exactly the same as if we came at it from the other side, the absolute value of negative 4. So one thing about absolute values is that when we're looking at the absolute value of a number, it's whatever that number is, whether it's positive or negative. So if we were trying to find the absolute value of 28, it would be 28. If we were trying to find the absolute value of negative 120 and a half, it would be positive 120 and a half. So the absolute value is just whatever the number is without any negative signs attached to it. Ultimately, what I want you to be able to do today is to take an expression like m plus 6, an absolute value, minus 14, and see what the value of that expression is going to be when m is 4. Now, we know that whenever we had a problem like this, it basically comes down to 2 steps. That the first thing we want to do is to substitute. So we'll have the absolute value of m plus 6 minus 14. And since I know m is 4, I took the m out, and in its place I'm going to put a 4 right here. Then we're going to simplify things. Before we get to any simplifying, I want to remind you of the order of operations, that this is the order that we go in from top down to bottom whenever we want to simplify any sort of expression. Right, so we start off by taking care of any grouping symbols like parentheses or a fraction bar. And when it comes to absolute values, absolute value is going to be a grouping symbol. So we're going to take care of what's inside of there first and find the absolute value of whatever that number is as our first step. After that, we'll go on to any powers, multiplying, dividing, or adding and subtracting. So going back to this problem, we have m plus 6 in absolute values minus 14. We've already substituted the 4 in for m, and now we need to simplify the rest of the expression. So we take care of our grouping symbols first, which is going to be the absolute values, and we simplify what's in there. 4 plus 6 is going to be 10. Next, actually find the absolute value of that 10. And with absolute value, it's the distance that number is away from 0. So 10 is going to be 10 units away from 0. Now the grouping symbols are all gone, and we go into our last step, which is just subtracting. 10 minus 14 is going to be negative 4. And that is our simplified value. So let's try one more, same type of problem, worded a little differently, but let x equal 2. Find the value of 23 minus the absolute values of 3 minus 4x. So again, our first step is to substitute, and then after that we'll simplify. So we rewrite the entire expression, 23 minus absolute value of 3 minus 4x. We're going to take the x out, and in its place substitute the value for x, which is 2. Now we go into simplifying the expression, and our first step in the order of operations is to simplify what's inside the grouping symbols. So we're going to simplify what's inside of these absolute values. Looking closely, we have minus and times in there. So just as a reminder, our order of operations go grouping symbols, then powers, then multiply and divide, and finish up with adding and subtracting. So when we're looking at this expression of 3 minus 4 times 2, as we go down our list of the order of operations, we're going to come up with multiplying and dividing before the adding and subtracting. So we have to multiply that 4 times 2 first. Rewrite everything else, and once we get to this 4 times 2, do that. So 4 times 2 is 8. But everything else stays the same, even those absolute values. Now we're still trying to clean up what's inside the absolute values, so the next step is to do this subtraction. Rewrite everything else, 23 minus absolute value, and when we subtract 3 minus 8, we get negative 5. Since what's inside the absolute values is all simplified, now we take the absolute value of that number. So we got 23 minus, and the absolute values of negative 5 is going to be positive 5. So we're going to subtract positive 5. And 23 minus 5 is going to be 18. That is our simplified expression.